Hey guys, in this video we're going to look at using Prometheus and Grafana to create a visual design or visual dashboard for the different metrics coming out of our Flogo Enterprise applications. And so this is available as of Flogo Enterprise 2.5, so if you're using later versions you won't be able to do this, but any versions after that should be able to work fine. So to start off, you'll need a Flogo app. In this case, it can be anything you want. I'm not going to walk through this because there's a lot of other videos that do this, just to keep the video a little shorter than usual. So what you do is you just build the app, build the binary, and you have the binary already within a specific folder that you want to use. So let me walk through the Prometheus and the Grafana setup a little bit. So to start off, what you need to do is have Prometheus running somewhere. In this case, I have it running on a Docker container. So let me go here. In this case, I have Prometheus running and I have Grafana running. If you want to run this on a Docker container, it's pretty much the same. If you go to the actual Prometheus instructions, getting started, I'll tell you exactly how to do that. You have to specify a volume for the Prometheus YAML file, basically the configuration file for this. So in the configuration file is this YAML file. What this configuration file does is what it tells Prometheus, these are the specific jobs or endpoints you have to be looking for. And honestly, the only things that really matter are the scrape and evaluation intervals, and then having these basically the job name and the static configs. So in this case, because I have a bookstore app, I'm going to name the job name bookstore, and then the static config is the IP address of what the bookstore is going to be running on. So maybe if I'm running this on an instance or on a cluster, that may be a public IP address. If I'm running it locally, like I'm doing here, this is actually the private IP address of my machine, and then the service port that I'll be using. So in this case, 47s, if let's say I had 3 or 4 apps, they would all use different service ports. So just keep that in mind, where you can't use the same service port for every app, because basically Prometheus is looking in that port specifically for that app. So once you have something set up like this, you're gonna just quit out of that. So you have to have this YAML file before you start a Prometheus. Once you start it up, you'll specify to use this YAML file. Once it starts up, if it starts up correctly, what you should do is be able to go to localhost 9090/targets, and you should be able to see the actual app that you've built. And it'll tell you that right now it's down, connection refused. So right now the actual app hasn't been deployed yet, so obviously it's down, but once we actually deploy it, we should be able to refresh it and see that the state is now up. In terms of the Grafana setup, in this case I also have this running on a container. This is relatively easy. Just look at the documentation for Grafana. It's just a matter of just running a Docker run, specify the port, and then the actual image itself. And when you first get started, you'll see that you have to select a data source. So what you want to do is create your first data source. You're going to want to choose Prometheus. You're going to want to apply the URL value of Prometheus. So if you have this running externally, somewhere that's publicly available, you would put that URL. If you have it running locally, then what you'd want to do, depending how you're running it locally, but in my case for a container, what I actually do is I define this as the internal IP address of the container itself. So let me show you that. Delete that. So this is the actual internal IP address of the container itself, and then I know it's running on 9090, and when I saved and tested, it worked. So once you actually do that for the first time, you have to go to dashboards and import Prometheus stats. So that's just the process here. Set the IP or set the URL, save and test, dashboard, import. This will not say re-import, this will say import, so import that in. So now you'll have a dashboard called Prometheus stats. If you click on it, you should see nothing because we don't have an actual app running, so it does nothing at the moment. So let's actually run our application. So if we go to our terminal, there's a few things to keep in mind. And so if you've actually seen within the playlist the app metrics video, you'll notice that, or you'll remember that there are environment variables you have to set if you want to allow app metrics to be basically outputted from your app. So and that's the exact same thing here within, if you're using Prometheus and Grafana. So the environment variable you have to set is Flogo HTTP service port equals whatever the port you've set. So in this case, it's 47s. Remember that within the YAML file, I had the IP address and then the port number. So like I said earlier, if you have multiple jobs, these ports are going to differ. So every time that you basically run this port will differ as well. So it's not always 47s. It could be 7778, 7779. Whatever, if you've defined it within the YAML file, it has to match on this environment variable when you run this. And then we have to also include Flogo app metrics Prometheus equals true. So basically you're saying that you want to, or you're telling Flogo that you're going to be using Prometheus and to enable this ability to be collected via that system. And then you define what the actual binary is. And so when we run this, you'll see that the management port has been successful on 4 7s. You'll see that the application has already started. And if we actually go back to Prometheus itself and I refresh this, I see, as you see here, that the state is up. So now it's saying that our actual application is up. And so if I want to check the endpoint out, you'll notice that I actually haven't done any invocation, so I'm not going to get any type of meaningful memory here. But let's try that out. Localhost for the bookstore. That's the invocation for the actual bookstore itself, gives me my value. And then if I refresh this, you'll see that Flogo activity metrics activity invoke rest log message return, which is what's actually built into the actual application itself. And it'll tell you maybe the time of how much time specific things have taken. So this one, 473 milliseconds, the log message 2, the return 0. And no matter every time that you run this multiple times, refresh that, you'll see that it's told you how many each completion basically. So the first completion, second completion, third, for all of the different activities, and then also the metrics for the actual app or the flow itself. So that's really cool, but this isn't a great visualization. This is just numbers or just words or just strings that you can see. But if you have a lot of logs being streamed out from your application, it's not very helpful. So the idea with Grafana is that that's the visualization point of view. So Prometheus is what collects the metrics, takes all that, and then you actually use Grafana in order to actually view those metrics. So let me just refresh this really quickly. What I need to do is change the sample ingested, and I have to change what this query value is. So in this case, this is just a default value. We want to change this into something that will actually pull the value from our Flogo or Prometheus metrics. And the way that you get that is within the docs site. If you search Prometheus on our documentation, you'll see that there's often used query tab. And it'll tell you some of the queries that you can use to actually, either within Prometheus or within Grafana, to actually get specific values. So in this case, I want to see the number of activities that got successfully executed per flow in application. So I'm going to copy this, paste this, and you notice that it refreshed. And when we started the job, first time we did it, it had 3. So obviously there was 3 activities. The time when I refreshed it a bunch more times, well, now it jumped up to 9. So if I actually, let's see, 1 more refresh, 2 more refreshes, 3 more refreshes, this might take a few seconds. So let's wait for a few seconds for that. But what should happen is that after those 3 refreshes, that's another 9 activity invocations in total. So we should see this number jump up to 18. So let's take a look at that in a few seconds. And if we refresh that, we'll see that it actually shows within Prometheus itself. And then you could also, within Prometheus, write these expressions here. So you can execute, in this case, once again, just like I did in Grafana. It's just a matter of just adding one of these queries. And in this case, it tells me that the value is actually 18. So there's multiple ways to actually visualize our metrics in this case. If you want something that's quick and simple, as in like a number value, you can use Prometheus and just enter what the actual query is. If you want a visualization, then the best thing to use is Grafana, because it takes basically the stats from Prometheus and actually visualizes it for you. So if you notice here, it's at 18, just how we expected and just how Prometheus is showing. So yeah, so this is very helpful if you have, let's say, applications that are consistently streaming types of data, or you have a lot of apps where it's difficult to keep track of them after you've deployed them and such like that, just because there's just so many to handle. This is just a good way to visualize it, and we're using open source tools. So we're not basically nothing proprietary about this. Prometheus can be used with anything. Grafana can be used with anything. You can run them on containers. You can run them in different servers or things like that. It doesn't really matter. So yeah, I hope this video was helpful, and feel free to check out the other videos within the playlist. There's a lot of cool stuff there on different new features that we have in Flogo Enterprise. So thank you.